Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
About 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It was tough at first, watching my mobility gradually decline until I needed a power chair to get around. But I've always believed in making the best of any situation, so I decided if I had to use a wheelchair, I was going to do it in style. I decked out my power chair with a full Wonder Woman theme, complete with the iconic red, blue, and gold colors. And yes, even a cape. It might sound silly to some, but it made me feel powerful during a time when I needed that boost. Over the years, I've gotten pretty good at maneuvering it. People often compliment me on how smoothly I navigate through tight spaces. Last week I was feeling a bit cooped up, so I decided to head to the local shopping center. The entrance was crowded as usual, with people meandering about their day. I was behind a group of shoppers, matching their leisurely pace since there wasn't space to go around them. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I felt a sharp slap on my arm. I stopped and turned to see this woman, probably in her 40s, who had just walked past me in the opposite direction. She snapped at me to slow down, her voice dripping with entitlement. I'm usually quick to anger, but I managed to keep my cool. Well, mostly, I just told her to get screwed, keeping my voice surprisingly level despite my rising anger. She launched into an indignant tirade, demanding to know who I thought I was to speak to her like that, and insisting that I should know who she was. I just rolled my eyes and moved away from her, not bothering to listen to the rest of her entitled rant. The whole thing was ridiculous. I was literally going at the same speed as everyone else around me. I went to get a coffee, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This woman had actually hit me. She physically assaulted someone in a wheelchair who could have lost control or gotten hurt. The more I dwelled on it, the more I realized I couldn't let this slide. I made my way to the shopping center office. When I explained to the security officer what had happened and asked about security footage, they assured me they had cameras covering that area and would be happy to provide the footage to the police if I filed a report. I headed straight to the police station across the street. The officer taking my report seemed skeptical when I mentioned telling the woman to get screwed, but I quickly pointed out that it was only after she had assaulted me. I acknowledged the laws about swearing in Australia, but suggested that surely self-defense would apply in this case. The officer agreed that physical assault was the bigger issue and told me they'd investigate the security footage. They advised me not to engage if I saw her again, but to record any future interactions. 3 days later, I got an interesting call from the police station. The officer told me that they'd identified the woman from the footage, and she was apparently well known to them, with multiple complaints against her for similar aggressive behavior. I immediately told them I wanted to press charges. The officer explained that given her history, they were taking this very seriously. They'd already picked her up and charged her with assault, and she'd been banned from the shopping center. They asked if I'd be willing to testify if it went to court, and I agreed without hesitation. The case went to court last week. Turns out she had 3 previous assault charges that had been dropped because people didn't want to go through with pressing charges. The judge wasn't impressed with her pattern of behavior, especially targeting someone in a wheelchair. She got community service, a fine, and has to attend anger management classes. She has to do her community service at a disability support center. Looks like she'll be learning some empathy whether she likes it or not. I've always been someone who stands up for what's right, even if it means playing the long game. Working in retail management for 15 years has taught me how to handle difficult people and navigate consumer rights. My wife often jokes that I should have become a lawyer instead, given how much I enjoy diving into the fine print of everything. Last September was supposed to be extra special. My first Father's Day as a dad. My wife and I had been trying for a baby for 3 years, and our little girl finally arrived in January. She's our miracle, and my wife wanted to make this first Father's Day unforgettable. The day before Father's Day, my wife came to me with tears in her eyes. She had ordered a dog tag with our daughter's face laser etched onto it, but what she received looked nothing like our baby. It was more like a blurry blob with weird shadows that could have been anyone's child. I told my wife I would handle the situation. Then I grabbed my phone, started the voice recorder, a habit I developed after dealing with difficult customers in my retail days, and headed to the engraver's shop in the mall where I work. The engraver was a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl. As soon as I walked in, he crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. I politely explained about the dog tag order and how the quality wasn't what we expected. He immediately blamed it on our photo quality. When I showed him the original high-resolution photo on my phone, he changed his excuse, claiming that laser engraving doesn't handle depth well and some faces lose shadows. When I requested a refund, he flatly refused and threatened to call security if I didn't leave. I reminded him that I worked in the mall and knew my consumer rights, but he just yelled at me to get out. After leaving an honest review about our experience on their business page, things got interesting. The engraver responded by accusing us of threatening violence and claimed he was getting a restraining order. My wife was worried, but I just left. I had recorded the entire interaction. We called the local police stations, and surprise, surprise, no one had heard of this business or any restraining order. That's when I decided to take it to the small claims tribunal. My wife thought I was crazy pursuing a $40 refund, but sometimes it's about the principle. A month later, we showed up at the tribunal and there he was, the engraver, wearing camo pants and a hoodie like he was going to a casual barbecue instead of court. The mediator warned us that we might want to reconsider pursuing this since the court costs might exceed the refund amount. I acknowledged her concern but expressed my desire to proceed. That's when the engraver announced he wasn't prepared for a hearing because he didn't have his evidence. The registrar ruled in our favor immediately. The engraver was ordered to pay us $40 within 2 weeks. He didn't pay, of course, but I had a plan. During this time, I'd been emailing with his landlord, sharing our experience and discovering I wasn't the only one with complaints. The landlord terminated the engraver's lease. I filed for a writ for levy of property, allowing the sheriff to seize merchandise equal to the refund plus court fees, now $139. I sent him an email asking if he'd like to settle this reasonably or have the sheriff visit. He responded with typical bravado, telling me to do my worst. The fee increased to $225 plus interest. I waited patiently, very patiently. In March, the sheriff visited his new business location. The sheriff gave him 2 options: pay the fee now or have merchandise seized. The engraver finally cracked. He paid $230, including interest. His face was redder than a tomato as he counted out the money. When I walked out with my refund plus interest, I couldn't help but think how a simple $40 refund turned into a 6-month battle that cost him nearly 6 times the original amount. I've been living in this neighborhood for about 5 years now with my German Shepherd Deuce. He's been my loyal companion since he was a puppy, and we've had a peaceful life here. Well, mostly peaceful, except for my next-door neighbor. Let me tell you about the first time I had trouble with her. About 3 years ago, her kid, who must have been around 7 at the time, tried to stab my dog with a kitchen knife while we were out for our evening walk. When I confronted her about it, she claimed Deuce had looked threatening, and her precious angel was just trying to protect himself. I ended up calling the police and she got fined for the incident. Since then, I've tried my best to avoid any interaction with her. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital where I work as a nurse, and I realized I was completely out of dog food. My own kitchen wasn't looking much better either, so I decided to make a quick run to the local grocery store before heading home. I was tired and just wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. While grabbing some essentials in the produce section, I spotted a familiar figure down the aisle. It was her, my neighbor, the same woman whose kid had tried to harm my dog. I immediately turned around and headed toward the pet supplies section, hoping to avoid any confrontation. That's when I felt something hit my right leg. At first, I thought maybe I had bumped into a shopping cart, but then it happened again. This time, definitely feeling like a punch. I looked down and there he was, my neighbor's kid, now about 10 years old, repeatedly hitting my leg. I asked him what he was doing, and he responded with a cold stare, telling me that both he and his mother didn't like me. I simply told him to go away, wanting to avoid any confrontation. I tried to walk away, but I barely managed 2 steps before I heard that shrill voice I'd grown to dread. His mother had spotted us and was storming over. She immediately started berating me about how I was speaking to her son. When I explained that I had simply told him to go away, she defended her son's actions, claiming he was just playing. She then accused me of having something against children having fun. I pointed out that being punched in the leg hardly counted as innocent fun. By this point, she was causing quite a scene. Her face was turning red as she started screaming about how I was some sort of child-hating monster. We were near the front of the store, and several customers had stopped their shopping to watch the spectacle unfold. That's when a security guard approached us. Before I could explain anything, she immediately launched into a dramatic performance, tearfully telling the guard that I had tried to grab her child. I explained the truth, that her son had been punching me, and she had started yelling when I asked him to stop. She continued with her theatrics, calling me a liar and demanding someone call the police. Fortunately, several customers who had witnessed the whole thing stepped forward. They confirmed my version of events, explaining how they'd watched her kid punch me and how she'd been the one to escalate the situation. The guard called someone on his radio to check the security footage. After receiving confirmation of what had actually happened, he told her that I would be the one deciding whether to press charges for her false kidnapping accusation. When I stated that I would indeed be pressing charges, she completely lost control. She started throwing herself on the floor, screaming and kicking like a toddler, having a meltdown. The guard had to call for backup to escort her to the security office. Her kid just stood there looking embarrassed for once. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. After reviewing the security footage and taking statements from witnesses, they arrested her for filing a false police report and disturbing the peace. I later found out through another neighbor that she was sentenced to 6 months in jail, lost custody of her kid to his father, and was ordered to attend anger management classes. She had to sell her house and move away after getting out, so I finally got some peace and quiet in the neighborhood. These days, Deuce and I can enjoy our evening walks without worrying about running into any knife-wielding kids or their unstable parents. Let me give you some context about my life as an engineering student. I was working 2 jobs while studying engineering, one as a math tutor and another at the campus computer lab. It wasn't by choice. My parents couldn't afford to pay for my education, and the scholarships only covered so much. Between classes, assignments, and work, I was averaging about 5 hours of sleep per night. My roommate was in the same boat, except he was working at the library and the engineering lab. This incident happened during my 3rd year. It was spring, which meant the university was conducting tours for prospective students. You know, the whole song and dance where they tried to convince parents to fork over their life savings for their kids' education. My roommate and I were in the engineering lab frantically trying to complete our final project report. Both our tutoring sessions had run late because students were panicking about their upcoming exams, and we couldn't exactly leave them hanging. The report was worth 10% of our grade, and we had exactly 2 hours until the submission deadline. That's when the Dean of Engineering burst through the doors. He immediately ordered us to stop whatever we were doing, announcing that a tour group was coming in 15 minutes and the lab was a mess. I tried to explain about our upcoming report deadline, but he cut me off. My roommate attempted to point out that the supply boxes were left by the delivery people, but the dean wasn't having any of it. He threatened to make sure our lab instructor gave us both zeros on the report if we didn't clean up. When I protested about the unfairness, he simply told us that life wasn't fair, and we should have managed our time better. He demanded that we make the lab spotless and memorable for the tour. He stormed out, leaving us standing there, completely dumbfounded. Our lab instructor walked in right after and caught the end of the dean's tantrum. He sympathetically told us he'd try to extend the submission deadline by an hour. We knew it wouldn't happen. Our instructor was great, but he could barely operate the online submission system. I took one look at my roommate and made a decision. I told him to start cleaning while I would finish the report. My roommate didn't argue. I was known for being able to write decent reports quickly, thanks to my mother being an English teacher who drilled proper writing techniques into my head since childhood. While unpacking boxes, my roommate discovered a box of industrial breathing masks, the heavy-duty kind that make you look like a supervillain. That's when an idea hit me. I asked my roommate if he remembered how the dean wanted this tour to be memorable. He tried to shut down my thinking, telling me to just help with the cleaning, but I insisted he listen to my plan. I explained my plan. The engineering building was built into a hillside with entrances on 2 levels. The lab had double doors that opened to another set of doors leading outside. The tour would have to pass through this space to enter the lab. We finished cleaning with 15 minutes to spare, then put our plan into action. We dressed up in full safety gear, breathing masks, lab coats, goggles, chemical gloves, the works. I filled a beaker with soap and water to create foam, while my roommate modified a voltmeter with random attachments and aluminum foil to make it look menacing. We waited by the doors and heard the dean's voice approaching with the tour group. He was in the middle of bragging about how state-of-the-art and completely safe our engineering lab was. That was our cue. We burst through both sets of doors, running full speed. I yelled for everyone to get back because something was unstable, while my roommate shouted warnings about an imminent explosion. I made sure to spill some foam as we ran past the group. The prospective students and their parents scattered like startled pigeons. We ran around the building, sneaked back in through another entrance, and quickly changed out of our safety gear. By the time the dean managed to gather his tour group and enter the lab, we were sitting at a table calmly studying. He rushed the group through the lab in record time, barely saying a word. Later that day, we got called to his office for a lecture about proper decorum and institutional pride. I innocently asked if he wasn't satisfied with how clean the lab was, or if perhaps the tour wasn't memorable enough. His face turned an interesting shade of purple, and he dismissed us immediately, mumbling something about his blood pressure. The next day, a new rule appeared in the laboratory handbook. Students are prohibited from handling lab supplies without faculty supervision. We were never asked to clean the lab again. Oh, and that report? We got an A. Our lab instructor had a great sense of humor, and I suspect he enjoyed the dean's tour as much as we did. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.